What's up, chat? Welcome back to the stream. It's Wednesday, and the Warhamster has brought us a great harvest, a great and goodly bounty of insane Warhammer 40k topics to talk about. What's up, everybody? You're not getting audio. You should be getting audio. It doesn't look like audio's wrong on my end. I think that might be on your end. Yeah, so we have some interesting things to discuss. We have some rules enforcement to talk about. A lot of questions about reactive moves and takebacks I think is going to be interesting to discuss with the community, as well as a couple accusations of good old-fashioned cheating, folks. Some of them are a little old, but yeah, it will be interesting to talk about. I did, as I was going through threads today, I found a very interesting one, which I actually don't think I'm going to talk about in this video because I think I might do a separate video about it. Because I do think that it opens up a big, a very interesting topic of discussion that I was considering making a video about a couple weeks ago, and I decided against it. But I might revisit it with this thread in mind. But that's a little sneak preview. If I do a video about it, it'll probably be around Friday or so. Anyway, let's dive into what we've got over here from the old Warhamster. How's it going, everybody? Let's dive in. I don't know much else to say. Let's talk about King of the Colosseum, the highly competitive format, KotC, made by Play on Tabletop. I have played King of the Colosseum in the past. We did it in our Crusade League over on the server, and it's been controversial to say the least. I think there have been a lot of mixed sort of thoughts about this format. I personally don't love it. I think it's very unbalanced from faction to faction. I think if you were to take it very competitively, you would find that some factions were very strong and some were unable to compete. Now, I believe I'm going to fact check myself here. I actually didn't look this up earlier, but I'm going to see if I can find the rules, because I'm pretty sure that the whole topic of this discussion is kind of moot, essentially. Oh, no, it's okay. Actually, no, it's fine. I just double checked this. We're fine. All right, so let's get into this thing. Am I the asshole for enforcing Hull cannot be outside the battlefield? Post a picture of his beautiful home, by the way, very large, and a row of King of the Colosseum tables. I guess he has gotten his local gaming group together, and they have gone to play a big KotC like event, a little get together to play King of the Colosseum. You could play 3, 4, 5 rounds in a day, because the rounds take like an hour maybe, and yeah, that seems fun. I recently organized a little King of the Colosseum event. King of the Colosseum is awesome. Check it out on Play with Tabletop. My friend of mine brought a Wave Serpent and proxied it as a Falcon. So we already have a problem here. Here's the reason this is wild. And this is where the contention comes up. If we can find the Wave Serpent. This is a real problem with the Wave Serpent Falcon sort of miniature. Because if we take a peek, so here's a Falcon, right? Sleek, smooth, aerodynamic. What a vehicle. And then we take a look at a Wave Serpent. We switch out the crew-operated gun turret for a twin-linked weapon on top, and we add these weave field generators to the side. These guys are really big, and I don't know if I can get a good indication of exactly how large they are in the Games Workshop photos, but they extend the physical size of the miniature by about 2 to 3 inches. About an inch on either side, just about, something like that. So when you're talking about a grav vehicle, which tend to be very big in 40k, if we look at things like Devilfish or whatever, they're very large, they're on a flying stand, they hull measure, and then we add these little bits and bobs on the side. They make the Wave Serpent miniature massive. Now, that has a huge gameplay impact, especially considering the fact that Wave Serpents are generally more highly played than Falcons. It does come up pretty often because, like, at any point, if these things like would impact terrain, you can't move through that section, for example, when we're moving, or if they overlap a ruin terrain feature, they count you as being in the ruin, or if they can't fit inside a ruin terrain feature, you can't see through that ruin if you're trying to be wholly within it. So there's a bunch of reasons that these little stupid spikes are massively important. Again, chat. base measure everything. 11th edition. Get rid of this fucking bullshit, but neither here nor there. So, friend of his proxies a wave serpent as a falcon, which means that the miniature he's using is 2 to 3 inches too large on the sides. In his first turn, the falcon full of Dark Reapers advanced to a spot marked by the red circle, I imagine objective marker or something, standing on an objective to disembark the Dark Reapers to shoot at an impulsor. He has a diagram. Oh, wow, he drew a diagram. Incredible. So he had a wave serpent here, and it advanced out. This is a weird thing about fast armies in this game, or mode, are kind of crazy, because these things are... they're curved. So if you can peek the side here, so if you can go from basically like, I wish I had my telestrator. But I don't. So I'm just going to have to do it myself. So if you can go from basically where the arrow is to the red circle, you essentially see basically over half of your opponent's deployment zone. If you have units like that on both sides of the table, you can see your opponent's, and you can access your opponent's almost entire deployment zone besides these little tiny sections of the back here, from turn 1. One of my problems with the format. So he moves to the red circle to shoot an impulsor. There's a black square, which is right here. So not behind the train feature, just out in the open. In fairness, probably could see it regardless, but he wants to do so while being on the objective so he can try to score it next round. Because of the advance, he couldn't get wholly on the objective, as his model was originally a wave serpent. First of all, why the fuck does that matter? Is that a KotC thing? I don't think so. I think I just used his normal rules. Yeah, holding on the objective doesn't matter. I'm not sure what that means. Maybe it means on the objective, within 3 inches of the objective. Couldn't get wholly on the objective. I imagine he means that he couldn't touch the objective because the spikes were not there, and he had to have space to move. So I guess what happened is that his miniature, because it was extra wide, touched the distance between the wall and the table edge and wedged itself so it couldn't touch the objective. It was physically too big. He argued if it would be a falcon, it would have no spikes on it and fit where he put it. I asked him to put the wave serpent on a spot with his advance to reach where it was wholly within the battlefield, which resulted in the falcon being no longer on the objective. Put the wave serpent on a spot with his advance where it was wholly on the battlefield. So, assuming, because he references wave serpent here, assuming that he means including the spikes. And so because of the spikes, he can no longer fit on the objective. His Dark Reapers were disembarked in front of the falcon onto the objective, then had to stay on the objective to hold it. He wanted to take the back end of the falcon after shooting with Skyborn Sanctuary. We set up the battlefields together the evening before. We used the measurements above to set up every battlefield. Exactly the same. He even printed some Colosseum walls. You can see them in the background here. They actually look great. I like these little things in the back, the 3D prints. See if we can get does it zoom? Is it going to do that weird thing where it doesn't zoom? Look at those. These are cardboard. They look whatever. But these ones, they look good. Nice job, opponent. Am I the asshole for asking him to move his falcon to a spot where it is wholly in the battlefield? If I am willing to accept it, I am. I just want to know what you all would have done under these circumstances. So, fascinating. So, assuming I'm not misreading this post, the wave serpent, you can see that the distance between the walls, because King of the Colosseum plays on I think it's a 4x4 mat, or it's a 3x3 mat. It's much smaller than normal game of 40k. The distance between the walls and the table edge is too small to have a wave serpent go through. However, a falcon could probably fit. But because his opponent was proxying a falcon as a wave serpent, he physically couldn't fit his model there without going over the table edge. And this man, this event organizer, this brave and selfless event organizer, who just wanted to play some King of the Colosseum, said, "No, dude, you used a wave serpent model. Get absolutely fucked." And you cannot end your movement there touching the objective because you would go over the edge. Pretty wild stuff, chat. Eldar takes suck on a Lotus Rain? Yeah, for sure. It is unfortunate because it is one of the problems with different terrain formats is that like they invalidate many different unit types. Eldar tanks potentially are one of them. They do have fly, so they could, like on the subsequent turn, for example, his opponent could like through the air to bounce over this wall, and it wouldn't be that big of a deal. He would have to add, I don't know, 4 or 5 inches to his movement, and then whoop, just bounce the wall and then keep going. But Yeah, I don't know. It's such an interesting question. It sounds to me, assuming that my interpretation is correct here, and that he held his opponent to the physical dimensions of the proxy he was using, not the model he was proxying. It sounds to me like this is kind of a dick move, chat. I don't know if I would have said the same thing. Especially given that it's a King of the Coliseum event, right? This format's like kind of fucked. You're going second in Eldar, so you're just about to get like just beamed on the head for no reason, right? You're just about to lose pieces turn one. It's only a 500-point format, so your opponent like star engines, extra movements, jets halfway across the table. They don't have any high toughness stuff. That's a restriction for King of the Coliseum. Is that you're capped at toughness 10. They don't have any high toughness stuff like in the whole faction, so they don't really. There's no real downside for them. They just can play like a normal list, and all their infantry characters are solid. So you could basically just play like 1/4 of a normal aspect host, and everyone else is like having to jump through a bunch of hoops to play the format. And then they go first, they beat you on the head. I mean, obviously that sucks, right? I don't think it's a particularly balanced format. But that said, it's a casual game and you're playing with your friends, right? And holding your opponent to such a standard feels like quite a bit. I don't know, chat. Brings in the question: if you bring a proxy, the onus is to understand the disadvantage you're onto. At least that opens a discussion. I agree with that. That's true. Generally speaking, if you are playing a proxy model, you should, as yourself, and honestly, this isn't really the question, but you should, as yourself, be willing to accept the downsides of the proxy miniature you're using. And not achieve any new advantages from it. And like, for example, in this case, right, you shouldn't assume that you can move on to the objective. But you also should not be able to draw line of sight from those spikes, for example, right? So it sounds like his opponent was kind of like he just assumed the interaction. And maybe that creates some bad blood or something. But as a player on the other side, if we are not in a tournament game, if we're in a tournament game, I think things are a little bit different. If we're here, like, playing, for a top table, and my opponent's like, oh, I'm going to move my proxy model into this area where it doesn't fit, I'd be like, well, I don't know. But if I'm playing King of this Coliseum with my friend, and all he owns is a Wave Serpent, but he can only afford a Falcon, or he wants to play a Falcon, I'd be like, yeah, that's fine, dude. Whatever. I don't know. It's an interesting hill to die on, in my opinion. It kind of sounds like neither of them are particularly correct. But I guess, like, technically correct resolution should be for the Wave Serpent not to be able to touch the objective. But on the flip side, I don't know. That's a very hard line to draw, which is interesting. So that's a little bit of a taster here, chat. I mean, what does the comment section say? It's a bit much to enforce something like that in an obviously fun event. Not even sure you got the rule correctly. As the organizer, you should not be too much about winning your own event. If you want to be so strict about it, don't let him play that or proxy it, and make it really clear before. Things like your event should be fun-oriented, and also need to give your opponent a little more leeway. Yeah. The thing is where it is King of the Coliseum, I think, changes quite a bit. Where it's like, come on, guys, what are we here for? We're playing a made up house format. Like, I don't know. It's worth remembering it's a dumb game to play with your friends. You're not even playing a real game mode. Brutal. Incredible. Communicating with your friend is greater than Reddit thread creation. Hot take. For sure. Oops, sorry, chat. My poor chair. You notice that after he moved to the spot, if you let him disembark and shoot, after you notice the overhang and made him move it afterwards, you are very much the asshole. I didn't even interpret it that way. You like go through the whole round and you're like, wait a minute. You're off the table edge. That's cheating. What the heck? Oh, man. You gained a huge advantage, very much leading to being the asshole here. Wild. I've seen a GT's people haul our weapon sponsons hang over the edge of the battlefield as long as it's less like 1/4 of an inch. You've never seen anyone complain. Well, that's just people not bringing it up. That is not correct. If your Lehman Russ sponsons or your Land Raider, like the Redeemer flamers, are hanging over the table edge, We should probably bring that one up for sure. I don't know. You should watch some wizard in a t-shirt shorts. YouTube just sent me that guy's YouTube channel like a bunch of times recently. He's got some funny ones in there, but to some extent, I don't know. He gets a little offensive sometimes. Hey, at least he's an equal opportunity shit poster. He does. For those who don't know, he does streams where he makes fun of like various kind of like nerd and gaming cultures, essentially. And so there's a lot of like. I don't know. There's a lot of stereotypes being thrown down about very like different gaming communities, some of which are correct and some of which are overblown. All right. So with that, chat, we can talk about the main topic of today. We'll go through some. We'll go through this, and then I have a couple of extra topics if we have time to talk about them, which I think are really fun. So there were 2 threads started relatively recently, within the last week, on Warhammer Competitive, talking about reactive moves, which I think is interesting. And this is kind of where the main thrust of the discussion is going to be, because we're going to be talking about takebacks and when you should know about gotchas. So here's the first thread: overwatching, reactive moves, and good manners. Generally new to 40k. Welcome in, Backarelk33. Nice to see you. I hope you're having a fun time with the game. If you move there, I'm going to... excuse me. During my casual games with friends, I let my opponents know if you move there, I'm going to overwatch. Or reactive move, etc. As I know it's just a casual game, and we're still newer to the game, although it generally reduces my chance of winning. If I were to enter in a local store tourney or an official tournament, what would be general good manners around that kind of play? Should I continue as I am, or is taking the advantage of their mismove just how competitive works? Thanks for your thoughts. So... this is a really fascinating question, because I think it comes down to, like, I think that there are definitely 2 schools of thought. Some players will tell you literally anytime you trigger anything. And I believe the first comment even discusses this. You can also say, and I do like this, if you want to move there, I might reactive move. Not stating I will, just a reminder of the possibility. Keep up honorable play. Belka says, remind them of the options available to you, but don't even unintentionally trick them by saying you will do if they do X, they don't actually want to do it. Throwaway says, I'm psyching out my opponent by informing him of my ability to react move every time and never doing it. So this, this is the gamesmanship of fair play here, chat. Sometimes one thing I will do is when my opponent reminds me of a reactive, I'm very cognizant of this now. Because when my opponent reminds me of a reactive effect, they say, hey, I've improved Overwatch on these guys, so pay attention. I will say, fucking do it. Come at me, bro. Because so many times, people are informing you so that they don't get accused of gotcha hammer later. And also, you play around it in a way that is beneficial to them. So, for example, if you say, I've improved Overwatch on my Dire Avengers. They have 24 strength 4 AP1 shots. And I'm moving a Land Raider. I'm not gonna care. You want to take that Overwatch, brother? You go for it. You take that Overwatch, dude. That's fine. Or they say, I have a reactive move with this unit. On a 6, I could maybe get a couple of bottles of cover. And you're like, that's fine. Take the reactive move, dude. I want you to. Obviously, it is important to keep in mind anytime one of those reactive effects will make a meaningful change in the game. But this happens quite a bit, where people will remind you with the hope that you internalize that. So either you don't engage with them because you're afraid it'll trigger, or you change your movement so that you purposely don't trigger it, and then you're in a less advantageous position. When generally speaking, the correct answer is to just trigger their effects and then play around it. So that's such an interesting discussion. I do think that, in my opinion, if you were to play very honorably, instead of saying if you move there, this will happen, you can say at the start of your opponent's movement phase, or when they're moving a model that's relevant, you can say, hey, don't forget, I have a thing over here. Not necessarily in conjunction with any particular movement that would cause them to reconsider their game actions, but as a way to remind them so that they are not surprised. Because obviously that creates a big a big negative play experience if you're like, oh, reactive, I gotcha. The other thing, too, and this is one thing that I think is important in all manner of 40k. If your opponent is moving into a reactive effect, but it's clear that the intention is not for them to trigger it. So, I mean, as a newer player, it's very difficult because you have to be cognizant of all the reactive effects that are available at any one time. You'll notice, like, more veteran players, people who know the game state, are going to constantly just declare their intention not to trigger reactive moves, right? They're going to put down a 9-inch stick, they're going to move their unit, and they're going to say, I'm not going to trigger this. Or they're going to say, this unit's going to remain stationary, so I don't trigger that. Or they're going to say, I'm going to move this unit, so I'm out of Overwatch or whatever. If you're new to the game, you don't know what all of those reactive effects are, and you're not cognizant of it, it's more difficult to do. But if somebody moves a unit and it goes 8.5 inches away from a 9-inch triggering reactive move, instead of saying, I reactive move, you say, did you mean to do that? Because what you don't want to do is be the person who goes, ha, I have defeated you because you didn't pre-measure the exactitude of that movement. That's my thoughts on it anyway, Chance. That's how I feel about this. Like the first comment in Honorable Play. Things are open more, but it's not hidden data sheets. Yes, it's just true. Yeah, and I have a little bit more to say once we get to the on that topic. Once we get to the second thread. In this case, we're talking about declaring reactive effects, and I do think that it just makes for a more intelligible game state and a more fun game experience for everyone if you are clear with your opponent about what you have over the top. If you worry about reminding them constantly after the third time, just say, I remind you 3 times, just like you, I won't remind you anymore. Yeah, I honestly, I only think that you're really only, I don't even think you're ever particularly obligated to do this, but I don't think you necessarily should feel bad about not reminding your opponent about your reaction effects more than once or twice, right? If you move up and it's turn 2 and you move up next to my Termagant unit and you go within 8 inches and you say, hey, just so you know, I have reactive move. Do you want to push back an inch? And they say, yeah, sure, that's fine. Thank you. If they do it again, I'm just going to take the movement. But if we've gone through a pregame discussion, they've looked at my data sheets, they know what my stuff does, and also I've told them, and then they keep triggering it, I don't know. That's on them at that point. At some point, the analysis of the board state is on them. But the first time or so, 100%. I think it's definitely worth talking it over with your opponent in that way. What if it happens after your opponent wishes to go after a unit, but you know he wants to shoot that one? What happens if your opponent wishes to go after a unit? Oh, like attack it. Yeah, to kill it. Yeah, sure. But you know he wants to shoot that one, so you move a different unit and do not move the unit he wants to shoot, and once he realizes you aren't moving that unit, he decides, if you don't move that one, I'll Overwatch at the end of your movement phase. I think I understand what you're saying. I think you are describing a very common line of play that is just legal. So if I have, let's say, this came up, I think, in a recent in a game I played recently. Let's say I have a unit on 1. I have a battle tank. It's been reduced to 1 damage. My opponent couldn't quite kill it. And I go, all right. I'm gonna, and he's got a Arcane Vortex fucking Infernal Master right next to it. And I move all my light infantry, right? I move my JPI squad and my scout squad, and I have a Battle Sister squad from Imperial Agents or some shit. And I moved them all next to that guy, and I said, do you want to Overwatch? He goes, no. Do you want to Overwatch this one? He goes, no. Move another unit. Do you want to Overwatch this one? He goes, no. And then I say, all right, the tank will remain stationary. I've denied his Overwatch. That's just good play. If at that point he says, oh, I want to Overwatch the first unit, you say, get fucked. You should have done that first. If you wanted me, he's holding up, we call this holding up the Overwatch. It's like from Magic the Gathering. You're holding up the Overwatch, showing it to your opponent and saying, if you move that tank, I'm going to kill it. So the correct answer is not to move the tank, right? Sit there, you get a shooting phase out of it. Maybe it dies in the charge phase, I don't know. But you have played correctly around the Overwatch, right? And your opponent has played correctly around holding the Overwatch, because if they burn the Overwatch early, get a use out of it early, then you get to move the battle tank away and it lives, right? So that's just a normal line of play. If your opponent asks for a take back after that point, that's no. You can't do that. That's wrong. You've just been outplayed, sir. And you don't get to know my entire movement phase before deciding where your Overwatch goes. Yeah, that's just That I feel like should go without saying because that's very common in competitive circles. It's a very common sort of play pattern, but yeah, it is a funny thing. Love telling people you have something you can't trigger, having to measure it all out and do it, and then not doing what they expected. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's funny playing demons. It's very funny because like every demon has like a very strong Overwatch threat. Like Bellicor shoots 12 times. The Lord of Change shoots 15 times. The like Gren and Klingo and Rodriguez and the Scarbrand all have like crazy flamethrowers. Yeah, I'm always just like, watch out. I have a 2d6 Overwatch here. It's Torrent. And they're like, oh, okay. I'll try to dodge that. And I was just like, I'm not going to shoot you. I don't care about Overwatch. I'm going to kill you in the fight phase. I'm not going to kill you with an Overwatch. If you have a heaven takeback, you should lose a victory point. So you could choose to go back and slow things down at a cost. I think that would speed up the game. I don't know. I think at that point, if you start to assess costs for it, you should just either give yourself or your opponent a limit on takebacks that they can ask for, or just don't allow them, right? At that point. If you're like, man, I'm really worried about the game extending out because I'm repeating plays, just be like, let's not do it. You make the play and then you're done. If it gets to that point, it's a whole thing. But if you're like, I don't know, you're tired after 9 hours of play or whatever, and you're like, oh, I plan to do a thing, I declare my intention here, and then I move the guy this way. Do you mind if I just re-rack that movement? I don't think takebacks, and maybe this is just my own experience, I don't think takebacks are doing much to significantly slow down the game. The only time I've ever seen takebacks do things crazy is when you're like, oh, I didn't realize that unit had fight first. You know, like, do you mind if instead of running up to charge them, do you mind if I just keep in the corner? And your opponent's like, yeah, sure, like nothing happens, and then you just have to move your unit back to where they were, or something like that. Like that happens occasionally in GT play. And that's where things like bogs down a little bit, but it's not that. It's never that crazy. Had a guy bring the Melta Primaris in a prior turn from reserves, like Eradicator Squad, to kill Chaos Predators. Moves them to get into Melta range. I had a detachment reactive move. You used it prior turns. Reactive move the Chaos Predator. He has to undo the move. He said he wouldn't move there if I was going to reactive move away. It's like... Well, I wouldn't have moved there if I knew you were going to reactive move. You're like, well, I couldn't have reactive moved until you moved. So you have created the branching universe that we exist in now. Yeah, that's generally I would say not good. If the difference is like, oh, I forgot you could reactive move like vehicles or whatever. I get it. I understand. Which attachment lets you reactive move vehicles? Is that? I'm sure there's one. Is it like I don't know. I have no idea. I'm sure there are Chaos Space attachments I've basically never seen played because it's. Is it Deceptors? No, it's not Deceptors. Oh, well, I have bad news for you, chat. The Deceptor reactive move does not work on Chaos Predators. So, your opponent wasn't the asshole there. Sky Splinter Assault? That's not a Chaos Space Marine detachment, chat. We're talking about Chaos Predators right now. Think it's fine to keep reminding somebody of your army rules a few times throughout the game. But if like an hour has already passed, your attention here is fine. 10 times too much. Yeah, it's a lot. Hound Panclan says it. Yeah, but we're talking about Chaos Space Marines specifically. I guess, can you do it on Mortarion? And that's a Nurgle Chaos Predator or whatever. Does Mortarion work on infantry only with his like reactive move? Oh. So you could technically reactive move Death Guard Predators with Morty. You can just reactive move fucking anything with that guy. But it's only 5 inches. That's cool. I actually didn't know that. You're reactive move Land Raiders. Whoa! Oh! Oh! I'm not here anymore. Actually kind of cool. I don't know. Is that good? Probably not. But might be. Might be cool. So anyway, in your house, Joe, use oopsie counters. You get 3. The third is an auto concession. Yeah, 3 is probably reasonable. I'd say 3 is like usually pretty fine. It feels to me like if you're taking more than 3 takebacks, you're very new at the game. And so like you need either additional leniency or you're just like for totally forgetting what's happening. All right, speaking of oopsies, encounters and things like that checked, let's talk about Indiana Cones. What a name over here. Who has a question about gotchas or takebacks? Wondering how you define a gotcha moment and how you would have or would react to them. From my perspective, a full-blown gotcha is defined as when your opponent uses a strat or ability against you that you were not aware of during the pre-game My Army and Detachment does this conversation and could have been easily avoided. To add further to this, your opponent refusing a usually minor takeback. That's interesting. From my experience, I've personally never encountered this nor seen it, which I think is great. Just displays the true positive social respect of the game. The other way I view gotchas, and I've personally experienced, is when a particular strat or ability is used against me. But the ability was mentioned during conversation prior to the game, but not during the game when the ability may arise. In my opinion, and how I approach the game is, for example, saying to my opponent, if you move out within X inches, I can react or shoot back. Remember, I can use the strat, blah, blah, blah. And offer minor takebacks when these moments arrive. If my opponent is not familiar with what my army does, I think it's fair. I do not expect them to take in everything I say to them and remember every detail of the pre-game conversation. So here's where I think my opinion, and I'm sure that I have a vastly different experience than many people, and so I think I'm very biased. Here's where my opinion differs from a lot of people. First of all, refusing a usually minor takeback, I don't think is a gotcha, right? I think it's like generally considered poor form, but I wouldn't consider that to be a gotcha. If I'm like, oh shit, I meant to, instead of advancing 1 extra inch, I meant to do an action, you know, before I move on with my movement phase, because I drew recover assets. Do you mind if instead of, I'll push the unit back an inch and then grab the thing, and my opponent goes like, no. That's fair. They're not in no way obligated to give me a take back, but it does mean that the tenor of the game changes quite a bit. But I don't think that's not my opponent getting one over on me, right? Which I think is sort of the essence of gotcha-ing people. Is like it occurs when a situation's constructed within the game where your opponent gets to sort of like weaponize the game state to get advantage over you that you didn't expect. So, for example, I mean, the big one is like you're 8.9 inches away from a 9-inch reactive move, and your opponent says, I got it. I'm going to do that. When you clearly weren't meant to be, like you were trying not to be. It's like when you move your unit and you go like, oh, I'm going to be 9 inches away. And then your opponent goes, and then measures it and goes, this guy's within 8. I'm going to reactive move. And you're like, well, I meant to be outside 9. Your opponent's like gaining an advantage from essentially what is a misinterpreted board state by one or both players. And in my opinion, that's kind of what a gotcha is. Not giving a take back doesn't feel like a gotcha to me. I think it's just generally like poor form, but you know, it is what it is. Got a question. How would you remind your opponent more than once or twice if you notice that the player isn't remembering his own data sheets? Would I remind the opponent more than once or twice if remind the opponent of my data sheets or their data sheets? So generally speaking, right, you have to I'm a little confused by the question. So like, are you asking whether or not you should remind your opponent of what their stuff does or what your stuff does? I think that if my opponent, and there are some instances where my opponent's just an idiot, right? And they're not bad at 40K, they're just a moron. And they don't know what their own army does. And this is like, it's the worst experience in the world. I had one time, I might talk about this like season of 40K in 8th edition on a video at some point in the future. But there was a season of 40K where if you weren't playing Space Marines, you could not compete in the game. You might as well go home, right? There was no army that consistently beat them. The meta game was different Space Marine chapters countering each other for a while. And I remember I was playing Tyranids at the time, and I played against a guy, and I had to continuously remind him what his models were equipped with in melee and how the fight phase worked as he tabled my army. And I'm like, is this really happening right now? Like, I clearly have so much more game knowledge than my opponent, but because their army's so powerful, they're beating me. There are, of course, some situations where that happens, where my opponent's just like just a Nimrod, but they're going to beat me anyway. And in those cases, if, like, you know, they're playing the meta or whatever, and they're, you know, they're sort of using its skating advantage, and they're clearly, like, you know, they're experienced with 40K with tabletop games, but not necessarily maybe the data sheets they have in front of them, I will generally not remind my opponent of things, right? Because I think at that point, the advantage that I have in the matchup is game knowledge, and if I can utilize that to my advantage to beat someone who has other advantages in the game so that we're actually on an equal playing field, in that case, then I'll use it, right? So if my opponent is beating me because they're playing meta, but they have no idea what they're doing, then of course I'm not gonna like lie to them, you know, or cheat, right? But I don't know, I might take that reactive move. If you move within 6 inches of a unit with a 9-inch reactive move, I might take it instead of reminding them that I have it, right? That kind of stuff. However, if my opponent doesn't know what their own stuff does because they're clearly new, just teach them the game. Like, at that point, right, there's very little on the line for either player. They go into, if you're brand new to 40K, you go into a game, especially a competitive game, expecting to lose. And if you're an experienced player in 40K and you go into somebody who's never played before, the only way to go is down. The only thing you can do is be an asshole. So you might as well just help them through their own game. And like I say, that's where I think my opinion on gotchas, quote unquote, differs a little bit from other people. Like I mentioned, I think that a gotcha occurs, and this is especially when it feels the worst, when you and your opponent don't have the same understanding of the board state, and you use that to sort of your advantage. I don't love that, right? However, if I have an ability that my opponent doesn't know about, right? They have not read my data sheet or whatever. That's not my fault, right? And in a highly competitive setting, game knowledge is a skill in the game, right? So there are people that like know all the data sheets, right? And they know all the detachments, and they've internalized a lot of the reactive effects that their opponent has. Should that give them an advantage throughout the game? Like, should that give them an advantage within the game? I think so. The pregame discussion is something that should happen, in my opinion, because it's sportsmanlike. And I think we're getting to the point, the difference between a sportsman, like playing honorably, like I said before, right? And playing incorrectly. I'm a huge fan of the pregame discussion because I think it helps level that playing field, right? However, I don't think it's 100% necessary. You know what I mean? I think that it's a courtesy that you give your opponent. However, if your opponent either doesn't pay attention to it, or you haven't given it, and they have access to your rules, and they haven't read them, right? I think that it's not necessarily on the other player's fault. They're just an asshole, like, yeah, but they shouldn't be penalized, for example, for not necessarily like exhausting going through every single data sheet they have. The data sheets are available for everyone to read. It's an open information game. And if you ask me a question about my army, I'm required to tell you. But at the beginning, I'm not required to tell you everything and info dump at you. I will, because I think that's proper etiquette. But I don't think if somebody says, oh, you've never played against my army. Well, here are my data sheets. I think that that's fine, right? In comparison to literally explaining my entire game plan before the game starts. And especially that's the case if I have a feeling that my opponent, or I've been, my opponent has made it clear that like they have an understanding. I do this. This happens a lot of times. I see this a lot of times. I go, hey, are you familiar with my faction? And your opponent goes, yeah, I play against them all the time. And I go, okay, sweet. All right, well, let's save ourselves some time and dive into the game. Here are my enhancements. Here's my unique stuff, my custom stuff. Here's my war gear, and then let's move. And then I use a strat. My opponent goes, oh, I didn't know you used a strat. I didn't know you have that. And I'm like, you told me at the beginning of the game you knew what my army was. It's not on me if you don't, if you actually don't, right? So I don't know if it's necessarily a negative, like a wildly negative thing if my opponent just, doesn't know or forget that I have an ability on my data sheet. And I think that's like a hot take. And I feel like I'm coming across much more aggressive than I actually feel that the game should be played. But Like, if you were to go to a judge, right, and you said, I didn't know my opponent had an ability, and they used it, but I wouldn't have done it if I knew they had it. In a situation like that, the judge's hands are tied, in my opinion. If you don't know that your opponent has the ability, it's on you. And I don't, like, I think it would be incorrect to penalize the other player, for example. In the interest of a egalitarian game, right? A game that's actually fun, I think you should be transparent to your opponent at all times. But if push comes to shove, when it comes down to the point where, if you need to get something adjudicated, for example, because you didn't know what your opponent's army did, that's not on them. Is, I think, the point that I want to make, if that makes sense. Is there an official way to access somebody's Codex rules without buying it? Yeah, not official, but the resources are online. Wahapedia, 39K Pro. You can look at data sheets in basically any list builder. Those are all available for sure. After getting got, should constantly be a habit to ask if you have any fight first. Do you have any reactive moves? Any up and down? Yeah. Those are all important questions. And honestly, even if you feel that, and I do this constantly, I'm constantly checking my opponent's abilities during a game, right? Even if, like, I feel generally confident that, and obviously the difference in perspective here is that I play this game as my full-time job. So it's easier for me to internalize all of the data sheets in 40K, right? But, and I feel like I have a, I don't know, 90% accuracy rating at any one time if I look at the board state that I know basically everything on the board can do at any one time. However, I will constantly be asking my opponent, can you do anything if I move here? Do you have anything in reserve? Do you have anything that can go into the reserve? Because sometimes you just fucking forget. And it being an open information game, your opponent is required to tell you that stuff. Now, the thing that's not included in this thread that I think goes alongside here is like an angle shoot where you say, you ask your opponent if you have any fight first in their army, and they go no, and don't tell you they have an ability that once per game gives them fight first, right? Where you have essentially intentionally used obscure language or inaccurate language to obscure your own army abilities. That I think that's probably paramount to cheating. If you are actively being non-transparent with your opponent, and they're actively asking you for game knowledge, I think that 100% should be prosecuted. And they don't talk about that in this. It's probably a similar discussion, I think. But that's where you cross the line, in my opinion, between just, keeping your game actions close to your chest versus literally just cheating. Do you have any up down? No, but I have a stratagem that if I move this guy here, could up down him. And you're like, that's implicit in the question, my guy. Because I think down that road lies madness, right? You cannot ask your opponent if you have any reactive moves, stratagems that grant reactive moves, stratagems that allow you to move in response to shooting attacks, stratagems that allow you to move in response to charges, stratagems that allow you to, abilities that allow you to reactive move, but only once per game, abilities that allow you to use a stratagem that allows you to reactive move, right? Like, the list of things that are implicit inside, hey, do you have any reactive moves, is huge. And obviously that should be taken in stride by your opponent. Yeah. So I think if my opponent goes, I don't have this, but I don't have this, but I have an identical effect that I didn't tell you about, I think you call a judge on that, probably, because I think that's an obfuscation of the game state for sure. But at the beginning of the game, if you don't ask them about their opponent, about their abilities, I don't believe that you are contractually obligated to give them information. Although I think you should, right? Is my opinion. It's kind of like declaring intent. Asking about an effect is almost a declared intent to not, or to play around that effect. You know what I mean? So if I go, my intention is not to go within 9 inches of this unit for whatever reason. Or my intention is not to go within 6 to trigger a heroic intervention. And then I go 5.9. Obviously, the correct resolution is that I nudged my model too far. It should be able to move back because I've pre-declared my intent. If I move a unit 7 inches away from a reactive mover and I don't say anything, and then my opponent reactive moves it, well, it's kind of on you. If you want to ask for a take back, probably reasonable. And it's probably reasonable for your opponent to give it to you, but it's not required for them. However, if you ask your opponent, does that unit reactive move? And then you move within 8.5. And your opponent takes the reactive move. It's a little shadier. It's a little grayer. Or you have a reactive move. You ask if that unit has a reactive move, and they say no, and then you move within 7, and then they use a stratagem that gives them a reactive move. That's just cheating. They've just cheated you. In my opinion. That is obviously my personal philosophy on the game. And I think this is a really interesting discussion for that, because I do think that there are some different philosophies. There are certain sim players who say you should always, at all times, tell your opponent about everything you can do permanently forever. And I think the game slows down quite a bit if you do that. And I think there are some people who would say, I don't believe in playing. I've heard literally people say this. I don't believe in playing by intent. You always play the game like it lies on the table, which I think is an insane philosophy to have. I'm immediately suspicious of anyone who follows that philosophy. A few months back, saw a finals game at a tournament, which one of the players asked to do a charge of the unit into combat after he failed to kill an enemy unit with his first charge. Oh, what? What the fuck? And his opponent allowed it? What? That's insane. I mean, it does happen sometimes, right? I could not fathom asking for that take back. That's wild. We've gone through the entire fight phase, and you're like, oh, do you mind if I charge this unit too so I can kill you? That's fucking nuts, dude. They're like, yeah, wow, that's insane. But I mean, I guess I guess kudos to his opponent for giving him the take back. But man, I would feel ashamed asking for that, especially if it was broadcast. Was that on stream somewhere? I would I would die. I would shrivel into a little disgusting creature and then fade away into nothingness if I did that on a fucking live stream. Do you mind if I declare the second charge? I guess if it's I meant to charge 2 jump pack intercessors into your rhino or something, and I didn't kill it with the first one, and you're like, oh, I forgot to resolve the second charge because I got tracked away with my impact mortals or whatever. But in the context of what you're saying, it sounds like it was a beefy unit charged another beefy unit and then didn't one tap it. And he's like, oh, I want to charge more stuff. When you fail a charge, could have done an action instead of declare the charge. Oh, and then go back to declare the action? Yeah, no, that's not okay. If you've already rolled anything, and you'll see some people even, they'll be like, oh, I rolled this bolt pistol out of this unit. And then they're like, fuck. I meant to do an action with that unit, but I rolled the bolt pistol, so I'll take it. A lot of people are good to cop that, which I think is very appropriate. As an opponent, if my opponent's shooting bolt pistols with their jump pack intercessor squad that was meant to be recovering assets, I'll let them take that back. The bolt pistol shots are almost never relevant, and so you just brain farted clearly. You weren't trying to get one over on me by shooting 4 bolt pistols. Message to newer players is the topic is not representative of the competitive scene in general. Top tables of Challengers Cup. We're still having these discussions as they play and rewind. Yeah, generally speaking, I think that there are I think elucidate things a little bit. In my opinion, this is my philosophy on it. I think there are 2 levels of responsibility, I guess. And one of them is that there is a baseline responsibility to the correct resolution of the game. That's all, in my opinion, is always online. Essentially, it's always present, where you say, "Hey, like, when you ask your opponent if they have a reactive move, right? The correct, because it's an open information game, the correct answer is to tell them the reactive effects you can use on that unit. If your opponent doesn't do that, right, the game is not being progressed correctly. This is specifically in context of takebacks. I also think that there are, this also includes, you should always, correctly resolve rules and things like that, right? Everything should be sequenced correctly. The responsibility of both players is to maintain that board state. There's a second level of responsibility, which is to, sort of decorum and sportsmanlike play. The responsibilities of a player to uphold the informational hygiene of a game is much more stringent on a baseline than it is, or is much more lenient, I guess, on a baseline than are the responsibilities to sort of maintain decorum and sportsmanlike play. Players are not required, in my opinion, to maintain sportsmanlike play. However, just like in any situation, right, there's a lot of things that I'm illegally allowed to do under the law, walking on the street. However, I can be called a fucking asshole for doing them, or not doing them, or whatever. And I think the same goes for gameplay, right? I would say 99.9999% of games follow that kind of second level of responsibility, where both players are playing in a sportsmanlike manner, where both players are playing in a way where the information is freely given and they allow each other a degree of leniency. There's no mechanical or no legal, it's not a real law, but within the confines of the game, requirement for them to do so, right? A takeback is not a thing that exists in the 40k core rules. You are not obligated in any way to give your opponent a takeback. However, you should, and if you don't give them something very small, they might call you a dick and make a Reddit thread about you. And they would be totally within their rights to do so. So I think in order to frame this discussion, a lot of what my opinions are based on is that first base level of responsibility, where there is a minimum amount of required information that you have to trade with your opponent, and you have to consistently give them. There's then a second level that the game actually operates at, which is higher than that. So where a judge who is going to come into a situation where you and your opponent have a disagreement on the board, and they have to make an adjudication on the board state, what they will typically do is look at what that core base level of informational awareness in the game is, and not necessarily the sportsmanlike way to play things, because if you're playing with the sportsmanlike way, the judge probably wouldn't have to get involved. So from a purely a sort of adjudicant standpoint, only the first level matters, but the way the game's actually played is to the second level. So if you go to a tournament, you and your opponent are basically having a very long discussion about what you together consider the board state to be. That's essentially what a game of 40k is. And you'll find that a lot of these hypotheticals about which takebacks are allowed and which pieces of information I should give my opponent, and if I'm giving up any additional advantage for either withholding information or giving them too much information, like we talked about before. You can constantly be just telling them anytime you can react to move stuff. That's not actually how the game plays. That's largely hypothetical. The game is generally played the way you see it on streams, where people are just being laid back and having a conversation over the board and being like, hey, I'm gonna move over here, and you're like, oh, just don't forget, I got this thing, and then your opponent's like, cool, man, I'll think about that in the future or whatever. That's generally how this goes. And what the part of this form of content that happens, and I even saw this, some people had criticisms of me for sort of making these kinds of videos, is that the worst case scenario is that 0.0001 out of the 99.99999 of all games played rises to the top, and those are the ones we talk about because that's interesting content. But that's obviously not actually how the game really gets played in the vast, overwhelming, astronomical majority of actual games, which is good and great, and I love it. We have ousted the Tony Grupondos of the community for the most part, and generally speaking, 40K is great right now. Been playing Banishers a lot. Really wish you could limit takebacks. Use the Shadow of the Anarch treasure multiple times, and make sure they know about it, but they always forget. Yeah, that's a tough one. There are like Banishers is basically built around its reactive effects, and like once or twice is probably reasonable, but if you've never seen it before, it can surprise you. And I guess at this point, we're like 2 years from Index Grey Knights being like pretty popular, where it was like triple Librarian and Mists of Deimos constantly. Like you would just see the Mists of Deimos Terminator Drago cycle, where you would have Drago like in reserve, deep strike, charge, kill something, trigger mists, rapid ingress, move, charge, kill something, trigger miss, and you would cycle him around the board. I think as somebody who played through that, like as soon as I see Shadow of the Anarch on the table, I'm like laser focused in on it. But if you haven't experienced that before, it's like it's certainly a weird detachment to play against. I imagine that there is a lot of that, but it's probably something where you just make it very clear at the beginning of the game, hey man, I have this reactive thing, it's like crazy powerful, just like constantly keep it in mind. And if they just keep not doing it, just fucking take the advantage, I guess. Like, after you tell them you have it, the onus is on them not to trigger it, and then even if you give them a take back and they trigger it again, the onus is extra on them, you know? It's like, fool them twice, shame on them at that point. I don't know. Golden Rule solves most of this topic, yeah. Yeah, and you can kind of see it sometimes. Like, whenever someone like this comes up, like, I would say more often, well, maybe not more often than not, but many times. And I mean, I made this video about, LVO 2017 or 2018, where it was like literally just the karmic rebalancing of the universe on gotchas and sort of take back plays. But like a lot of times, if you make it clear to your opponent that you're going to take those advantages early, your opponent has no incentive to be lenient with you either. And so the game becomes very difficult to play on both sides. So by acting like that to your opponent, you simply, like by, taking every advantage and not making the board state clear and doing all this stuff, right? You simply make the game harder on yourself, right? It might be harder for your opponent to play mechanically, but you have to do that every game. And they only have to do that for that one game. So realistically, I think you're just ruining the experience for yourself. Even though your number of wins might go up. Ooh, what a time. Wow. Slightly. There was a comment on one of these threads that was like, you don't have to tell your opponent anything, and it was downvoted. I wonder if there's I wonder if I can find that. New to this is a phenomenal content. I love to talk this. Full concept 5652. New to competitive play. I've been on the receiving end of more gotcha moments in friendly local league than any RTT or GTs combined. Curiously enough, none of the players who did that show up to other events. Yeah, because they know enfranchised players will kick the shit out of them for doing that. They know people, if they try to show up to a GT and play Gotcha Hammer on their opponents, not only will their opponents very calmly play around most of their gotchas, but also will meet that energy. If all you want to do is withhold information and try to win over your opponent by using reactive moves and they didn't expect or something, or going, aha, I have this thing that you didn't know about, oh boy, is a like competitively constructed Shadow Mark Talon list gonna fucking run circles around you, bro. If that's the only way you can win a game, you're gonna die. This is, and I'm sure at some point we'll have a whole video dedicated to this. This is one thing I like to call casual toxicity, where it's an unfortunate like phenomenon of the gaming space, where players who are less enfranchised tend to be the more competitive, right? We see this a lot, and like every TO whoever runs a GT knows about this, that the most competitive bracket is 2 and 2. Like the where most of their contentious judge calls or arguments get called to in a GT space is in is in the mid tables, because the people at the bottom tables don't give a shit, and the people at the top tables know what they're doing, and it's the people at the mid tables to whom the 5th win in a GT, or the 5th round of a GT, could be the difference between a winning and a losing record. And so, to them, it, like, totally encapsulates their whole personality. The other thing, too, is, like, in a local space, if you consider yourself to be good at the game, right, you are less, and you're not GT experienced, and you're not, you know, you're probably not going to show up to GTs, because you're going to get your shit rolled, and you know it. And that would, like, challenge your self-perception as somebody who's good at 40K, right? Because you show up at an event, and everyone there is better than you. You are no longer the big fish in the small pond of your local game store, and you're a teeny tiny fish in a pond of much more skilled players. And so these people, they just tend to congregate around local communities that sort of. And then in order to justify the fact that they don't go to larger events, they say, oh, I'm not a competitive player. I'm a casual player, which is why I don't play competitively. But I'm really good at the game, and I always win. And then, generally speaking, the reason they always win is because they're not particularly sportsmanlike to their opponent. They do take a lot of these, like, kind of, you know, shady, edge case, fringe advantages. And they never play anyone who's better than them, right? And unfortunately, it sort of burns out, like, the casual community in a lot of places. And it creates this, like, weird miasma around those communities where they actually tend to be more toxic than the more competitive ones, which is pretty wild to think about. The other thing too is that another thing that tends to happen. I'm not going to say this happens 100% of the time, but a lot of these players, you'll see a lot of people who say, "Oh." Competitive Warhammer 40K, what a fucking joke. Those people are disgusting. I like 40K for the lore, and I always play my lore-friendly Ultramarine Gladius task force where I squad tactics people when they didn't know I had it. Because a lot of times those people have to justify the fact that they don't go to competitive events, and so they have to villainize the competitive community. And they have to say, well, the competitive players are terrible and horrible people, so we never play with them. We only play with the local tabletop sharks who always do more gotchas. But competitive play is full of morons and disgusting people. And you get this, like, vitriol from these casual communities that is never reciprocated from the competitive community, which is very interesting. It's very funny. So it creates these really toxic casual environments, which sucks, because that's where people join the community and then percolate into the competitive community. And unfortunately, these are people who are not good enough to play competitively and only ever want to beat people of a lesser skill, like new players of lesser skill level than them in a local capacity. And end up probably turning a lot of people away. It's unfortunate. Never had more bad casual games than event games. Yeah, for sure. I remember when I was starting 40K, this is one of my favorite. I'm going to do a series at one point on my, I think for Patreon things. I don't want to make this like a huge series on my main channel, but I'll probably do it on my Patreon. But I have some horror stories from when I was first starting 40K, and I was in this space, right? I was in this group of people where it was very casual. They had this vitriol of competitive play. I was a very competitive player from War Machine back then, and so I was like, I really want to get into competitive play as quickly as I can, because I was already enfranchised in that sort of style of play. But I was like playing through these local players to play the game, and I remember one game very explicitly where I set up the table. I set it up to a Nova standard, which is standard competitively to tournament terrain. It was relatively balanced, relatively for 8th edition, where mostly it was just these big, huge buildings in the center that would block off several like lines of sight angles around the middle, so you could put melee stuff up the middle, and you could play range games around the sides. That was generally what the idea was. However, the walls of the buildings were very thick and very tall. Usually it was at least 12 inches tall, so you could line of sight block to a knight. And they were at least 1-2 inches thick, so they didn't fall over or break. And the rule was you can't put models on the top of them because they're so big and thick, just for the physical reason, the physicality of the miniature. you could theoretically like infiltrate or do shit and put infantry on the top edge where they were uninteractable. The rule in the tournament packet was you cannot do that. So I go and I set up. I say, hey man, I'm setting up terrain. I'm playing this. I'm playing. You know, we're gonna play a casual game. We scheduled it beforehand. I said, hey, I'm gonna set up a Nova terrain because like it's a tournament practice and it's meant to be balanced. Like, do you want to play a competitive mission? He goes, no, I want to play a mission out of the book. I go, okay, cool. And then he goes, so I'm gonna infiltrate my units on top of the big ruins. And I go, well, the way that the terrain format works, you're not supposed to do that. And he goes, well, we're not using that. We're not gonna use the competitive terrain format. We're only gonna use the core rules, and you can do this in the core rules. And I'm like, fucking, is this happening right now? I was like, whatever, dude. And I'm playing Tyranids. Everything in my army is melee. I think I didn't have Hive Guard at the time. I had like one warrior squad with Deathspitters or something. And I'm like, and it's like Havoc squads. He puts like 2 Las Cannon Havoc squads 12 inches above the table, where literally nothing can ever attack them. And I'm like, all right, man. And it was the most insane thing I'd experienced, I think, to that point. I was like, this dude we're playing a casual game at the local game store with nothing on the line. And he wants to, and in order to gain an advantage, he wants to basically weaponize the terrain, the more balanced terrain format against me. By explicitly not using rules that it was designed around. I was like, okay, dude. And that's the sort of like, that's the kind of energy, you know what I mean? Then that guy dropped an N-word during that game, and I never saw him again. Which was an interesting time. What a time to be alive. That's the local game store community chat. It's so interesting. Go to GTs. You'll find more fun people. Quote unquote casual. Yeah, insane. Absolutely insane. It's so wild. Had a person like that at your last GT? Worst game of the tournament? Tons of gotchas? Yeah, that sucks. That sucks super hard. I'm sorry about that. I'm glad it was only one. It was only one game, and it is definitely the minority rather than the majority for sure. Sounds like a nice guy. Yeah, it was wild. Yeah, it caught me off guard. I should have called not the TO. There's no TO. It's fucking. I should have called the staff though. I should have told them about it afterwards. But I was like, I didn't really internalize it for another like 5 minutes. I was like, wait a minute, what the fuck? Like, why are you calling my models the N-word? I was like, I think I pushed back on it a little bit at the time, but like thinking back on it, it's one of those things where you stay up at night. It was like, why didn't I just punch that guy? Like I should have just kicked the shit out of that man, and but I didn't, and I wish I had. What an asshole! Yeah, I don't know. It's so interesting, and that comes up a lot of times, unfortunately, in the casual community. And I wish it didn't. I wish everyone was cool and chill. But it is what it is. Anyway. Yeah. That was a little bit of a tangent, but that's certainly interesting. I don't know if I have any other discussion about this particular topic to go over, but I do have many other threads we can talk about. Should we palate cleanse a little bit, chat? I have an interesting one to talk about, which I think is a fascinating question to discuss. Oh, what happened here? Oh, the Reddit doesn't like this one. I have to fix it. One sec, chat. All right, here we go. Warhammer 40k without apps asks aggravating map. I marked this as 40k, but it could be for AOS or Kill Team as well. I have this annoying issue that's bothering me. I hate it. It seems that most people are using some kind of app during their games. I'm gonna give this guy a drawl. He feels like he's a little boomery. It seems to me like some people are using some kind of app during their games for their lists or checking their rules quickly. Maybe even tracking wounds. For me, it would be much more appealing to play the game without having to bring up my device all the time. But I don't want to play horror people because I'm being stubborn about this. He says he doesn't want to play himself poor. Excuse me, I put words in his mouth that don't exist there. He doesn't want to play worse. I assume that he doesn't want to play poorer, slower opponents. But that's not correct. He doesn't want to play worse, and he doesn't want to play more slowly because he's being stubborn about it. Do you have any? Do you rely solely on prints or books or even various apps, that are just too practical to give up on? This is such a wild. Yeah, I read Poor People, but that's not right. He doesn't want to play with apps. Now, it sounds to me like he doesn't like it when other people play apps, which I don't know if that's explicit here. Is obviously crazy. If people want to play with apps, they should. If you don't want to play with apps, that's totally legit. I personally, I don't use tabletop battles. I did for a while, and it was annoying to flip between tabletop battles and any list in my army list or my rules references, and so I stopped using it. And the other thing I noticed too is that when I would put down my phone, I would close my phone, I wouldn't look at it and I wouldn't get the score updated to me, and because I wouldn't have it in front of me. I guess part of it's I'm maybe used to Tabletop Simulator, and I have my overlay, my stream overlay, and I have my score in my face, so I can constantly look at how many points I have. And without being able to do that on my phone, I was like, this sucks. I hate this. So what I ended up doing was I went back to OG times, and I highly recommend that Aggravating Map does this. You go back to the ancient days, the ancient Stone Age times, before the advent of even the internal combustion engine, the wheel, or the bow and arrow, and you print out a score sheet and you laminate it, and then you write your score on it. And that's what I started doing. I bet I have it. I played it in a tournament. I made my own little score sheet out of one that was online. Here we go. Here's my score sheet, chat. This is my finals game from the tournament. I always take pictures of these so I have them recorded in case somebody comes up with a question later. Because if somebody goes like, "Oh, I got this objective on this turn and I think I scored it wrong," then we can double check because I always have a record. So I made a score sheet. I put my name on it. I got the game number for a tournament. I didn't write the game number down because I forgot. Put the primary mission, secondaries each turn. I had to build this one special because the score sheets that are online are like quite crazy complicated. So I made this one explicitly. And it's kind of a shit show. So I don't know if I would share it, but I should probably make a better one at some point. But I've got the total scores at the bottom, so I constantly can add them up. I can add up my totals, and I can find out what my total is actively in real time, and then I can double check it and verify it with my opponent, and then have the final score at the end. And it's always with me on the side of the table here. Do I have a picture with my score sheet being used? Yeah, I just have it. I just put it on the side of the table, and I'm always looking at it. So I think it's 100% valid to say I don't want to play with a scoring app. It's certainly not valid to say I have a problem with my opponent using a scoring app. Now, the one thing I will critique apps like Tabletop Battles for doing is making it possible. I don't want to say anyone does this. I've never seen anyone do it. I've heard people say that their opponent's done it, but I've never, obviously it's impossible to verify, where people will change their secondary draws in their app. It makes it possible to do that, right? If you aren't expressed with your opponent. So, I will say, the one thing you should always do if you are playing with an app is you should, when you go to draw secondaries, place your phone on the table in front of your opponent and hit draw. What you should never do is go, it's my turn. I have drawn the two best secondaries in the game. I've drawn extend area denial. And your opponent's like, did you? I mean, I guess so. It's what it says now. That is changeable. So, in my opinion, I think that with some transparent play, scoring apps are 100% totally fine. As with everything else in 40K, you should always be transparent. And it's essentially the same thing as, like, you could, in theory, you could just, like, fake your dice rolls or stack your deck or whatever. So it's the same thing as always. I think apps just maybe make it a little bit easier and impersonal for their opponent. And I don't think anyone actually does it, but I do appreciate it when people show me their app. they go. Here's my app. Here's what I have drawn. I do like that quite a bit. I don't know if this person doesn't like it when their opponent uses apps, and I think that they should. That's unreasonable. I think it's more difficult to play your own stuff if you don't have the app, right? If you don't have a very easy way to reference your data sheets. I'm not saying it's possible. To keep reference cards around in order to reference your weapon stats, but the apps are much more reasonable. The other thing too is that I think some people get in their head about the size of a device. So like accessing this on your phone sucks. You can get like a 10-inch tablet on Amazon for like $50. And if you expand a little bit, you can, for like, if you pay $100 or $120 or so, you can get a larger tablet. You can get, I don't know, like a 12 or a 13-inch tablet. And I would say that's probably a much more reasonable rules reference if you don't want to use a phone, which I totally understand, because it's small and it's annoying to navigate. But having a slightly larger screen size could certainly help. I've seen some people do it on laptops, which I guess is also reasonable, but they burn through battery so quick, and then it's like kind of annoying to keep at the table. I think a tablet's much better. So I would say you can either print out your own score sheets, or you print out your own reference sheets, which kind of sucks, and then you have to update them if anything could change. Or you can get a larger tablet, or you can just deal with your phone for rules references. I absolutely don't think that there's any reason to require people to play with apps for scoring purposes. In fact, I would prefer that they are not.
Ryan G donated
Thank you for the super chat, Ryan.
$5
It took a really long time to come through.
Quick Trevi, you play Tyranids. What's the melee profile of a Neuro Tyrant?
It's 3+ weapon skill, 6 attacks, 501, but it goes to 601 with the synapse bonus. I'm gonna fact check myself. Ready? Brother. Look at that. Boom. What a time. People should start reading their own rules. It would solve a lot of problems. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, part of it too is like, I mean, it's hard to ask people to do a bunch of studying, to like get into the game. I don't know. It was supposed to make your point? What was your point? That I have to look it up? And we just talked about how I know like most of the stats. I don't know all the stats. I have to look up stats, and I fact check myself on stats all the time. But I know most of the stats. That's an easy one? All right. If you ask me a more esoteric one, I might fuck up. If you ask me one that doesn't see any competitive play, that's the way to get me. If you ever want to stump me, just ask me about a data sheet that like doesn't see, that it very rarely sees competitive play. Like I don't know anything Legends basically, or like I'm sure there's like a really like obscure Forge World selection somewhere or something. Like what's the profile of like a Thunderhawk battle cannon? I don't fucking know, man. I've seen a Thunderhawk in person like 2 times in my life, and they're basically unplayable in the game. So I'd never do it. What's the melee profile of a monolith? I believe, if I remember correctly, it's 6 attacks. It's 2+ weapon skill. Is it 8-3-3? Now we're gonna look. Oh, it was 8-2-3. Shit. God damn it. I'm ruined. Channel over. What is the Thunderhawk battle cannon? I want to say it's like 2d6 plus 6, like 12-2-3 or something. Oh, D6 plus 2 plus 6, 10, 2, 3. Okay. I gave it way too much credit for being good. It might actually be good at 2d6 plus 6. D6 plus 6, 10, 2, 3. Well, oh well. No longer have faith in the channel. Oh, good question.
Ryan G donated $2 through Super Chat. Calls full melee profile.
That's a great one. I think he's 5. He's 5 axe attacks, right? At, I want to say he's like 6-2-3 on a 2+, and then he has 4 extra attacks at like 4-0-1, I think. Is that right? I'm gonna get all these wrong. Oh, he's 8-2-2. Oh, he's worse than I thought. Well, get wrecked, I guess. And then he's 2d6 instead of 4. All right, fair enough. What's Cypher's melee stats? That's an easy one because they're just his guns. It's whatever his guns are. It's like 3 attacks at 8-3-2 for the plasma, right? And then 6 attacks at like 5 or 4-1-1 sustain. The feeling when a pyramid melees you, yeah, for sure. The other, it's like tank shock super hard too, right? Because it tank shocks for 13 and then hits you with the fucking 2+ weapon skill. It used to auto hit. It was sick actually in old times. What do I think about the Space Wolf Codex in light of the coming Chad guards? I think it's fine. I think that it loses a lot of. It doesn't get worse. But I do think that it loses a lot of its luster in comparison to the Space Marine stuff for sure. How many reps and how long did I put into the game to feel as confident as I am? So it's like it's an iterative process. I mean, like, in terms of reps, about, this is an interesting little thing I do every once in a while. So, about, I would say half of my games or so go on here. So you can actually, you get a pretty reasonable rep count. Oh, I don't know if this has a video count, actually. Oh, it does. 602 videos. So about, given the fact that, I guess, I don't know, probably 10% of these videos are commentary and not gameplay. And to be fair, the commentary helps a lot in, exposure to new stats. But I probably have 1,000 games of 40K between 8th edition and now. If we consider that about half my games make it up here, and that some of these ones are commentary games, so I would say it's close to 1,000 games, I guess. And then commentary helps quite a bit because you get to see all the weird shit, right? And you get very exposed to very standard weapon profiles for highly competitive stuff. There's also I have a video on this. I think it might be on my. I think I put it on I did put it on the channel. There's a video on the channel about how to memorize your stats. And I talked about how it's changing a little bit now that they're diversifying different Space Marine chapters and stuff. But an interesting thing you can do, and this is a throwback to the way that the game used to work, is that it was everything had the same profile across factions, right? So every time you looked at a Space Marine for most of 40K's existence, you knew exactly what it did because they all had the same stats. And while things are less consistent now that they're doing things like Space Wolves and Emperor's Children get extra speed, like Plague Marines have extra toughness and stuff like that. Those are kind of like the exception that makes the rule. And one thing that you can do is once you internalize a couple of baseline profiles, you can sort of extrapolate out most of the other profiles in the game from there. Especially defensive stat lines helps a lot. But you can also get it for offensive ones, where you go, well, Space Marines T4, move 6, a 3+ save, 2 wounds, and then you go, and if the Space Marine is on a 40 mil base, it probably has 3 wounds. Right, if it's an infantry Space Marine on a medium base, it has 3 wounds, with the exception of like company heroes and now Victrix Honor Guard, which have 4, which are special. They're special guys, so they get a special exception. So like a Space Marine's it's like move 6, T4, 2 wounds, 3+ save. You put it on a 40 mil, it goes to 3 wounds. You put it on a 40 mil that is a character bodyguard, it goes to 4 wounds. Right, but generally speaking, all those other stats remain the same. When they have a power sword, the power sword is either a normal power sword or it's mastercrafted. If it's mastercrafted, it's 5/2/2, and it's basically 5/2/2 across the board, unless you have a special one. So like the Black Templars have a special mastercrafted power sword. It's easy to remember because it's like a faction sub-theme that you remember. Oh, they have lethal hits. Their power sword gets lethal hits. That's the difference. But every other mastercrafted power sword in the game, generally speaking, does exactly the same thing. So you can, now that you know what that baseline profile is, right? If it's a good power sword, it's 5/2/2, and then you can extrapolate like branches off of that. The Black Templars one is they're better at fighting, and they have a theme of critical hits, so theirs has lethal. The Grey Knights one is a 4 sword, so it has +1 strength. Theirs is 6/2/2. Okay, cool. And then that once you start to recognize those patterns, it basically it cements most of the game. Relatively easily for like normal stats. Then there's always like weird shit where you have like some random attack from a random thing, like Fjord's Hellfrost Cannon. What the fuck is that? I don't know. You just have to remember that. But generally speaking, a lot of the stats will maintain consistent themes, right? You can always assume a plasma gun at a baseline, right? Is a plasma gun 7/2/1. It overcharges to 8/3/2. And generally speaking, it gets +1 to each of those stats, regardless of what its baseline stats are when it overcharges. So, for example, a Plasma Blaster, right, goes from 7/2/2 to 8/3/3 because it gets +1 AP, +1 strength, +1 damage whenever it overcharges. The same goes for like the Redemptor Dreadnought, right? When it overcharges its gun, it goes to it's 9/3 or 9/4/3, I think, because it starts at 8/3/3 or 8/3/2. But it used to be that all those weapons were the same across the board every time. So the OG was that your Marines were always they had strength characteristic back in previous editions. So they're strength 4, T4, 1 wound, 3+ save. Terminator equivalents were same deal, but they had a 2+5+ invulnerable. They actually didn't have higher toughness than regular Space Marines for a while. Guardsman equivalents were almost always 100% of the time across the board. Strength 3, ballistic shield, strength 3, 5+ save, 1 wound. And you could discover by memorizing those baselines. You could discover like the stat lines for basically almost every model in the game. There were some weird ones where like orcs were like T4 but a 5+ save. And like T4 straight 4 but 5+. They were the weird one. They were the odd one out. Usually T4 went with a higher save characteristic. But like 90% of stats in the game all follow those exact same like 3 trends. And so you always just mathed against those like a couple like 3 or 4 defensive stat lines. It's much more complex now. But back in the day, that was how everyone remembered all the stats. Anyway, chats. Yeah, they used to have only 1 wound. Yeah, they're pretty wild. They're actually kind of unplayably bad for a really long time. But they also used to ignore all save characteristics, so that was pretty cool. With power weapons. Back in my day. Need to watch that video? Yeah, I can find a link to it, I think. Ooh, I accidentally closed my chat. Sorry, chat. I made 2 of them, I believe. Yeah, I made it 6 months ago, and nobody watched it. So I put it in my tactic. It was early in my tactic series, but nobody watched it, so it is what it is. Here we go. I found the link. Boop. There you go, chat. All right, folks. Do we have any additional things to talk about? We have some cheating allegations happening. But we are 90 minutes in, so I might save those for next week. And then there's a much more serious cheating allegation that's been levied that I have just noticed today, and so I'm interested in deeper diving into that. But anyway, I think we'll go ahead and start to wrap things up unless we have anything else to talk about. Yeah, it's interesting. I think it is. It's certainly. I don't have any details. There's no details. There's a post that was made. There's no details that are being shared about it. But I think that it's a good jumping off point to discuss a lot of other some other, I don't know, pretty important topics when it comes to foul play in 40K that I think people have been shying away from, and I don't know. I'm getting a little fed up with it because it sort of continues to happen, and it might be time to make a video about it. I don't know. We'll see. Have heavy melee armies fallen out of the meta? That's a good question. I don't think so. Well, I would say yes in that very few armies are purely melee, right? Orcs and World Eaters. World Eaters actually are really good. So I would say no, not really. I would say generally speaking, it depends on your definition of a melee army, because I think a combined arms army with a melee focus is actually very strong. And that can include things like Emperor's Children and basically any Space Marine army. Like when you think about it, Shadow Mark Talon, Space Marines, right? It seems like, wow, you get Centurions and you got Inceptors and stuff. Well, Inceptors are basically a glorified melee unit. They're basically Noise Marines. And everything else in a Shadow Mark Talon army is almost entirely melee. You have like at least 30% of your points are dedicated to melee-only troops. And generally speaking, your utility, your like 3x5 Assault Jetpack Intercessors are melee disruption, like utility pieces. And so basically half of your army is dedicated to almost entirely melee or pistol shooting, which is like 6-inch range melee, or 6-inch range shooting, which is functionally the same, essentially. So when you think about it, the same goes for like Black Templar's Gladius Task Force, where like 1,200 points of their army is dedicated to entirely melee, despite the fact that the biggest things on the table are Repulsor Executioners. And I think that's the way the game has shifted. That's how basically every army is constructed now. Is like there are very few armies that are like, I'm just going to charge you, because that's not really a functional game plan. You have to be able to interact with your opponent at a distance to succeed, even if most of your army's melee. And so I think the trend hasn't been for melee to get pushed out. The trend has been for traditionally melee-focused armies to just move to more of a hybrid build, which I think is probably healthier in general. Space Wolves, Blood Angels are just worse World Eaters. Well, Blood Angels got pushed to essentially that exact same build, where every Blood Angels list is now like a hybrid Angelic Inheritors, where you take 3 units of Sanguinary Guard and then everything else is a gun. Although there's those lists that are like... Blood Angels have always had a range component. I think I've struggled to remember a time in which Blood Angels did not have, at the very least, Ball Predators, which aren't close range shooting, but they are still, anti-infantry shooting. And now they're focusing even heavier on it because they take like a whole contingent of stuff that rerolls by itself, and then all of their Sanguinary Guard reroll by themselves as well. And then they can oath the moment very judiciously. Space Wolves is tough, though. Space Wolves is in an interesting spot. But I will say, I think that you're probably going to see more of a fall off of those factions in light of other Space Marine chapters becoming more interesting. People who are Space Wolf diehards will switch to whichever variety of Space Wolves is superior for their preferred playstyle. And every other, or Space Marine diehards, or such, I think it's Space Wolves, but that's a Freudian slip. And basically, a lot of the other varieties of Space Marines are more interesting than pure Space Wolves. It's funny to hear Space Wolves, Blood Angels, World Eaters are worse than each other. They all say it to each other too. Yeah. World Eaters is higher performing than Space Wolves is right now, but I think World Eaters has a much greater population count. The event I went to the other day was like 25% World Eaters players. I played 80 Khorne Berserkers round 1. That list is not good into 6th grader demons, turns out. Hard to be a Space Wolves player right now. Well, as I'm always telling this to Space Marine players, but I think it's okay if you want to continue to play Space Marines, but it doesn't have to be Space Wolves. Like the cool thing about a Space Marine army is when you have the bones of a Space Marine army, right? You have they have the shooty tanks, you have the dreadnoughts, and you have the utility stuff. You can just flip that army into fucking anything you want, right? You can get a select number of chapter-specific units and turn that army into a different chapter. And it might not be like as exciting as, I'm not playing actual Space Wolves proper, but like you can still play very competitively by just switching out your Space Wolves stuff for Black Templar stuff if you want to, without having to like actually get a lot of new things, which is the cool part about Space Marine army. Like if you have the bones of a Space Marine army, you can build into like any playstyle you want. It just depends on the chapter you decide to play at the time. And I encourage people to explore more in the Space Marines. You can still theme it. Like there's plenty of people who are like, I'm playing Ultramarines, but my army is painted Space Wolves gray, and my Gilliman is a converted like Lehman Russ, and it's like cool, and people love that shit. When you rock up to a Space Wolf army and you're like, whoa, what's that big guy? And you're like, well, I'm Ultramarines keyword today, so I have Gilliman, but he's Lehman Russ and has a big axe, and you're like, that's sick, dude. Hell yeah. I don't know. I think people get into that stuff. I see a lot of people who have like 30k converted Primarchs as their Gilliman all the time, and they just play whatever chapter they like, and they play it as a different chapter, or they play it as Dark Angels, or whatever. The other thing too, I think, is that a lot of the data right now that we're looking at is from. I will say that I think that there's a little bit of a terrain bias, as we talked about previously, where earlier this week, where I do think that you do see the more like esoteric melee armies come out in WTC play, because they're more conducive to melee armies, or at least melee infantry, I should say. You can play melee infantry like intercessors and stuff much more easily in that format, although you can't play like melee big stuff, which sucks. Don't let me take something back early in the game. I mean, I guess. Do I have that many takebacks? I don't feel like I do, but maybe I have a higher opinion of myself than I deserve. Anyway, chat, I think I'm gonna hop off. We might do some Warp Forge over on the Purple channel later. We will definitely have. I haven't put this in the calendar yet because it got rescheduled like 6 times, but there should be a pod finals tonight as well. So I will be live over there with some commentary. But otherwise, I'm going to be working on some videos. Might do this video on this interesting Reddit accusation. Might also do some other stuff. I don't know. I have some tactics videos I want to do. There's a lot going on. So anyway, I'm going to hop off. Thanks everyone for hanging out with me. Remember to keep it classy, folks. Have happy wargaming. Stay tuned for some more videos. Oh, and watch my Raven Guard video. I posted a Raven Guard video this morning, and nobody watched it, and it made me sad. I stayed up until 3 a.m. editing it, and now I want people to watch it. But it was not that well watched. Here we go. Watch this video. Yeah. I'm making my way through the Space Marine chapters, and I don't know. If people watch them, I'll keep doing them. I don't know about the Hammer of Averni, because I want to redo the Space Wolf, the Salamanders video, because I think in light of the more recent updates to Salamanders, I don't think my original Salamanders video is very good. I think it was fine at the time, but now I disagree with it, and I want to make a new one. I don't know about Iron Hands. A million people ask me for Dark Angels, so I'm almost certainly doing Dark Angels, but if people aren't that interested in individual Space Marine chapters, then I'll move on and do different factions. But anyway, that's it. Cheers, everyone. Thanks for hanging out with me. Keep it classy, folks, and I'll see you in the next one.